The wind at Angel's Rest Station never stopped moving. It whistled low through the dry grass, kicked up dust from the gravel path, and sent old papers tumbling like forgotten prayers. The sky hung flat and colorless, stretched too thin over a land that no longer promised much. Used one bench, one rail, one water tower, leaning like it didn't care anymore. And on that bench, a little girl sat barefoot, knees pulled tight to her chest, a pair of women's boots tied together and slung over one shoulder. She didn't cry. She had cried already in the cramped train washroom beside a still hand growing colder by either mile. But tears were for softer places, for people with rooms and warm stoves, not for the wide, cracked plains where even the sun looked tired of trying. No one had asked her name. The conductor helped her off the train with a stiff hand and said, "Wait here. Someone will come." Then he boarded again. She hadn't asked where the someone might be coming from or how they'd know she was the one who waited. Her dress was too short now, frayed above the knees. One pocket had a hole through which poked the ear of a cloth rabbit that had no face. She turned it in her hands over and over like a worry stone. An hour passed, maybe two. A cart rumbled by and didn't stop. Men came and went, glancing her way the way folks glance at stray dogs. Half pity, half fear of being bitten. She watched them without blinking. Dust gathered in the folds of her dress and the corners of her eyes. She blinked once, then stared down the tracks as if she could will the past to turn back and bring her mother upright again. A dog sniffed at her heels and wandered off. Still she sat. When the sheriff came by, he squinted at her as if she were a puzzle no one had asked him to solve. "Where's your folks, girl?" she said quietly. "My mama died today." He rubbed his neck. "Well, you can't stay here." She just looked at him. He shifted his boots, cleared his throat, and muttered something about the preacher's wife maybe knowing what to do. "Eje check in after supper," he said. "See if anyone's claimed you." He didn't ask her name either. Afternoon burned into evening. The wind cooled but didn't stop. A horse approached slow and heavy, hooves soft on dry dirt. Its rider swung down not far from her. A tall man in a faded coat, wide-brimmed hat pulled low, carrying a small crate of nails under one arm. She watched him the way stray dogs watched people, ready to bolt, but hoping. The man didn't look at her right away. He tied his horse, checked his saddle strap, lifted the crate into the wagon hitched nearby. Then, finally, he glanced toward the bench. She stared straight at him. Something about that stare made him pause. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a wrapped sandwich, still mostly intact. Without a word, he crossed the short distance and held it out. She didn't move. "It's turkey," he said. His voice was rough, low, like gravel under boot, but not unkind. She took it with both hands. He returned to his wagon without waiting for thanks. She unwrapped it slowly, carefully, like it might vanish if she hurried. The first bite was too big. She chewed and chewed, eyes never leaving the man. He loaded another small parcel, adjusted the rope, climbed onto the wagon bench. His hands were large and weathered, but moved with care. He looked toward her again, not sure why. Then she said it, "Can I spend a day with you?" No tremble in her voice. No pleading, just a plain question, dropped like a stone into still water. The man didn't speak for a long time. He looked at the sky, then at her. Finally, he nodded once. She stood without hesitation and walked toward him, cloth rabbit dangling from one hand, boots thumping against her back. He didn't offer a hand up. She climbed the wheel herself and settled beside him. "What's your name?" He asked as the wagon creaked forward. "Eddie May." He nodded again. Ransom howled. They didn't speak again for miles. The land rolled wide and dry around them. Sparse cottonwoods leaned away from the sun. The wind pulled threads from her hair and made them dance. She let it. He kept his eyes on the road, but every so often he looked sideways to make sure she was still there. At his ranch, the gate dragged along the dirt as he opened it. The place wasn't much, just a barn, a chicken coop, and a house made of sun-bleached wood that looked like it had been built with more hope than lumber. A clothesline snapped gently in the wind, though it was empty. The porch steps creaked. He helped her down this time. The dog came running, an old mutt with a limp and one ear that bent wrong. Had he knelt and touched its head, it wagged once and lay down beside her like she'd always lived there. Inside the house was clean but plain. A single chair by either fireplace. A kettle on a hook, a table with 2 chairs, though one was stacked with old books. She didn't seem surprised by either sparseness. He poured her a tin cup of milk. Set it before her. She looked at it for a long time. He sat across from her and didn't speak. "Where's your wife?" she asked. He blinked once. "Didn't work out." She nodded like that made sense. She sipped the milk. That night, Ransom laid a spare blanket on the couch, then hesitated. "There's a bed upstairs if you'd rather." "Ella stay with the dog," she said. He nodded. Little Lantern set it by her feet, then climbed the stairs and closed the door, though not all the way. She curled up on the rug beside the dog, boots tucked under her head like a pillow. He didn't sleep. He sat in the upstairs room, looking out the window. The land was so empty, it made a man's thoughts echo. In the distance, a coyote howled. He closed his eyes, remembered the sound of a woman crying in a bed that never held children. Remembered how quiet the house had been since. How easy it was to forget what small sounds could mean. Footsteps, breath, the clink of a cup. "You listen now." Downstairs, a child was breathing. In the morning, he found her in the barn feeding the chickens. "You know how to do that?" he asked. She shrugged. "I watched. Don't need to work. You're just visiting." He liked feeding things. That afternoon, he rode into town to get sugar and flour. She sat beside him again, quiet, watching the wind. At the general store, folks noticed that yours Ransom asked the shopkeeper's wife, a pinched woman named Mrs. Patch just for the day, he said. "She looks thin. Sis been traveling." He paid and left. The woman watched him go mouthed. Back on the wagon, Hattie said nothing, but her hand was resting on his sleeve. That night, he fixed cornbread. She burned her fingers trying to help. He bandaged them in silence. She didn't wheeze. They ate together at the table. The second chair had been cleared. After supper, she drew a picture of his horse with a charcoal stub and pinned it to the wall with a tack. "You draw?" he asked. Sometimes, he looked at it. It wasn't good. But it was alive somehow. Lines pressed with the kind of care you don't learn in school. Later, she curled up on the rug again. Distime, he put a second blanket over her. She said nothing but shifted closer to the dog like she'd been waiting for that gesture. He sat in the chair until the fire died low. In the stillness, he said aloud, "I'll take you back tomorrow." They know what to do. She didn't answer, but he swore the dog looked up at him like it disagreed. The next morning, he was loading the wagon when the sheriff came riding up. "Morning, Holt," Wexler said, tying his horse to the fence. "Morning." That the girl from the station? Ransom nodded. "You keeping her?" Ransom said nothing. "Well," the sheriff went on. "Preacher's wife is checking with the Burks. They might take her." Lot of folks asking questions already. Didn't they think kindness needed permission? Ransom said kindness don't. But this town runs on its own kind of oil and folks don't like when it burns funny. He tipped his hat and rode off. Ransom watched the horizon a long while after. Inside, Hattie was packing her rabbit and boots into the burlap sack. He leaned in the doorway. "You ready?" She looked up. "Am I going away?" He didn't answer. Her lip trembled for the first time. Then she said, "I can be real quiet if that helps." He stepped forward, then stopped himself. "I'm not sending you anywhere bad. Used someplace with other kids. Maybe someone younger." She looked down. "I ain't small enough," she whispered. His chest hurt in a way he hadn't felt in years. Outside, the wagon creaked under the weight of waiting. Inside, a little girl stood too still, boots in hand, rabbit limp against her skirt. And somewhere in his mind, a woman's voice asked softly, "What if we're not broken, Ransom? What if we're just meant to hold things others let go?" He reached for his coat and turned away, not trusting his face. Then a small voice behind him said, "Can I spend one more night?" The wind howled through the porch slats. He closed his eyes, then nodded. What, like a man who'd already lost too much to turn away from someone asking to stay. The morning broke brittle and gold with wind tracing low across the grass like fingers searching for something lost. At the whole ranch, nothing moved at first. Not the porch swing, not the shutters, not even the chickens. Used quiet, wide as the plains. Quiet so deep it felt like the house hadn't been breathed in for years. Ransom stirred his coffee and watched the girl from the window. She was already outside sitting on a feed bucket, knees pulled to her chest, staring at the chicken coop like it might tell her what to do next. Hair boots still tied together, hung from the porch railing. She hadn't put them on since she arrived. She didn't seem to know if they were meant for walking away or staying. The dog rested its chin on her foot. She didn't move. Ransom took another slow sip, eyes still on her. He didn't know what he was waiting for. Maybe for her to speak first. Maybe for the ghost of his wife to tell him what to do. Instead, the wind answered, lifting the corner of a saddle blanket, flapping the barn door once. The kind of restless wind that made a man remember every promise he failed to keep. He stepped out with a mug still in hand. She didn't look up. "You hungry?" A beat passed. Then, quiet as morning dew, "I could be." He nodded, turned back toward the kitchen. By the time he had the skillet hissing, she was sitting on the step, swinging her legs gently. She watched his every move through the open door, watchful, not needy, like she expected things to be taken away. He slid 2 eggs onto a tin plate, thick slice of sourdough beside them. She took it with both hands like it might slip. "You don't got to clean the plate," he said after a while. She paused, yoke on her chin. "Not if it's clean already." He almost smiled. When she finished, she stacked her plate on his. "Can I help with something?" He hesitated. "Then you ever water a horse?" She blinked once, silent. "No, but I think I could do it." She followed him to the trough, her bare feet silent in the dirt. He watched her try to lift the pail, too heavy. She didn't ask for help, just dragged it half full, splashing most of it on herself, then reached for another. He watched a moment longer, then turned to the saddle post. He'd never seen someone so small take up so much space just by trying. Later, he showed her how to brush the mare. "She likes behind the ears," he said. "He liked behind the ears too," had he said matter of fact. He looked at her, not sure whether to laugh or weep. Instead, he gave her a rag and pointed to the dusty windows. "She don't need to do that," came a voice at the door. MRS. Patch stood there, parasol closed, face pinched like a lemon dried too long in the sun. Ransom sighed. "Morning." She stepped inside without asking. "He came to see if you were serious about keeping her." "She's not a stray dog, Leona." You didn't answer the question. You didn't just pour a second cup and left it on the table for himself. As he hovered near the far wall, cloth rabbit held against her chest like a shield. Leona looked her up and down. "You're thin girl." "No, ma'am." Leona clicked her tongue, turning back to Ransom. "The preacher's wife still thinks the Burkes might take her. They've got space." "Burkes want pretty orphans," Ransom said evenly. "The kind they can parade on Sundays. She'd be taken care of. I'm taking care of her." Leona squinted. "Ransom. You're a single man and folk remember things. You really think it's wise after what happened before?" Something in his face changed quietly like a man pulling shut a door you weren't meant to see behind. "You think I got more space in my house than half the people preaching from pews?" Leona sniffed. "She'd break your heart, though." Then she left. The door clicked like a gavel. Hattie didn't ask what she meant, but Ransom looked down and saw her holding the rabbit tighter than before. That afternoon, he saddled the mare and handed her the rest. Walk her around the pen, just slow. She looked up at him like he'd given her something holy. She walked in lopsided circles for 10 minutes. Every few steps, she glanced toward him to see if he was watching. He was. That evening, she carried firewood to the hearth without being asked. He cooked stew. She peeled the carrots, handed them over without speaking. After supper, she curled up again on the rug, but this time she laid her boots beside his by the door. "I noticed before he doused the lamp," she said into the dark. "Did you ever try?" "Try what?" "To have kids." I paused. "Yeah. Did they come out?" "No." "Was it the mama's fault?" I looked toward the window. "They said it was mine." "Oh." A long silence, then soft as a secret. "My mama said I was loud and stubborn. But worth it." You swallowed hard. "You're quiet now," she added. "Yes, am you still worth it?" I couldn't answer. The fire cracked slow and tired. I left it burning longer than usual. Next morning, she was already outside again, feeding the chickens. One pecked her hand, and she yelled, but laughed, though. I stood on the porch with his coffee, watching her. The dog nudged his leg. "Yeah," he said. "I see her, though." I hitched the wagon before noon. "Need to resupply," he said. "Can he come?" I hesitated, then nodded. She put on her boots without complaint. They were too big, flopping on each step, but she wore them like armor. The ride into town was quiet, but not empty. She asked what the different clouds meant. I told her which ones carried storms, which ones just passed. "Storms always come," she said. "Sometimes they leave things behind." At the general store, people noticed again. Mrs. Patch stood outside with the preacher's wife. The Burkes happened to walk by, arms full of fresh fabrics. "She looked nice in blue," Elsie Burke said, fake sweet. "She looks nice now," Ransom said, and walked past. Inside, Hetty ran her fingers across a row of marbles in a jar. He bought her one. She chose a red one with a swirl like fire inside. "Do you ever play?" he asked. She shook her head. "Never had no one to lose to." "Outside," someone whispered, "that's the cursed rancher stray." Ransom's spine stiffened. Hetty just kept walking. "At the wagon," she said, "they don't know you." I stared at her. "They think they do," she added. "But they don't." I helped her up without a word. Back at the ranch, she set her marble on the windowsill right where the sun hit it. "It's mine," she said. "But I want to see it shine." That night, she fell asleep with the dog again, Rabbit in her arms. Ransom stayed downstairs longer than usual. The fire snapped. The clock ticked. The boots were still beside his. In the quiet, he whispered, "You're worth it, though." He didn't realize she'd heard until she said, barely awake, "I know." The next morning, the sheriff returned. I stayed on his horse. "She's got 2 days," he said. Burke sighed. "You don't have to make this harder." Ransom didn't answer. "She ain't yours, Ransom." Ransom looked at the house. Then at the small boot prints in the dirt. He didn't look back at the sheriff. He just said she didn't ask to be. Inside the house, a girl crouched behind the curtain. She'd heard every word, and her marble fell from the windowsill and rolled across the floor like a truth no one could stop. The rumors came faster than rain after a dry spell. By mid-morning, the general store was thick with it. Women pressing flour into brown paper bags. Hands moving automatically while their mouths churned fresher stories than the bread they'd come for. Words like inappropriate, unnatural, and not right floated around like flies in summer heat, buzzing just loud enough for ears meant to hear. Ransom Holt's name hung in the air like the smell of wood smoke that wouldn't lift. They said he'd gone soft, that loneliness had warped his sense, that taking in a little girl without kin or papers or promise of adoption was an invitation to trouble. Not because of what he'd done, but because of what he might. Men who'd lost things were unpredictable, they said. Especially men like Ransom. Good with his hands, bad with his luck. When he rode into town to pick up a horseshoe order, the gossip peeled back like curtains behind windows. I started toward Hetty sitting beside him, small hands clutched in her lap, her red marble in one, cloth rabbit in the other. He didn't say a word, but she felt it. Every look, every whisper, every space they were not welcoming after they left, Mrs. Patch set down her yardstick and said to no one in particular, "You ruin your name for one girl and you'll never get it back." I asked about it on the way home, boys low. "That's it mean to ruin your name?" Ransom didn't answer right away. Used shifted the reins and stared at the road ahead like the answer might be waiting in the dust. Man's folks stopped saying it kindly. She was quiet a while then. "They already don't say mine kindly." The card hit a root. Neither of them flinched. At the ranch, he tried to every space they were not welcoming after they left, MRS. Patch set down her yardstick and said to no one in particular, "You ruin your name for one girl and you'll never get it back." I asked about it on the way home, boys low. "That's it mean to ruin your name?" Ransom didn't answer right away. Used shifted the reins and stared at the road ahead like the answer might be waiting in the dust. Man's folks stopped saying it kindly. She was quiet a while then. "They already don't say mine kindly." The card hit a root. Neither of them flinched. At the ranch, he tried to brush it off, gave her a tin bucket, and pointed to the blackberry bushes along the edge of the fence line. "Pick what's ripe, not green. You taste the difference." She worked till her fingers were stained purple. He watched her from the barn, pretending to tack new horseshoes, but his eyes never left her. Not when the wind tugged her dress. Not when the dog curled beside her like a second shadow. Seated that evening, she set the berries on the table with quiet pride. He ruffled her hair. She leaned into it without asking. After supper, she asked to draw again. He gave her the last sheet of butcher paper he had, and she took her time. Her lines were slow, intentional, just like everything she did. It didn't look until she handed it to him. It was a sketch of his porch, his boots, hers, side by side. He looked at it for a long time, then said, "I'll find a nail for that." She smiled without showing her teeth. She didn't do that often. Later, after she'd gone to bed, he stayed up fixing a drawer that had stuck since winter. Not because it needed fixing, but because the silence in the house felt too loud now. When he finally turned in, he found a note on his pillow. Used one sentence in blocky letters. "I like your quiet." He folded it in half and didn't sleep. The next day, he rode into town alone. She stayed with the dog, feeding it scraps and reading from an old mail order catalog she couldn't understand. Just naming things she'd never touched. "Velvet," she whispered, tracing the page. "Petticoat comb with pearls." In town, Ransom walked straight to the preacher's house. "Asked for 10 minutos, got 5. "She doesn't belong with the Burkes," he said. "Ransom," the preacher said gently. "No one's saying you're not a good man, but people have long memories. You think you're helping her, but you're putting a target on both your backs. She needs somewhere to land. I'm not a danger. No one says you are. They don't have to." The preacher sighed.